Our next panel is the big one. It's what Student Pride Today is all about. It's the Attitude Magazine and Albert Kennedy Trust talking about the crisis that saw over 11,000 young LGBT plus people homeless last year, which is devastating. 1 in 4 homeless people identify as part of our community. So please welcome the chair of the panel by Attitude's editor, Cliff Joannou.
Hello, thank you.
Have a good time. I think we tongued that.
Hello.
Did we
can you hear me? Oh my gosh, you can hear me. About 3 years ago, we started the Attitude Pride Awards, which the easiest way to describe it, it's the Pride of Britain Awards, but for LGBT plus people. We went out and sought stories of people that have been through really distressing situations and have come out the other side. One of those people was a guy called Emmanuel Okogenu, and he is originally from Nigeria. His parents didn't take him coming out as gay too well. His father had a really difficult time with it, and the situation became difficult, it became aggressive. He was actually outed, going back a step, he's actually outed by a sibling who read some text messages on his phone. Eventually, Emmanuel found out that his parents were planning to send him back to Nigeria, to go back to the family that were living quite in a rural situation in Nigeria, to have effectively what they regard as conversion therapy. His only option was to run away from home, which he did. He fled, and he was living rough for a while, sleeping on sofas of friends, and eventually got in touch with the Albert Kennedy Trust. The Albert Kennedy Trust managed to help him. They got him into a safe situation, and they helped him through college, and he got through university, and eventually finished his law degree. So we gave him a Pride Award for everything that he'd been through and everything he'd accomplished since. One of the most important things that came out of that, for me, was just how overlooked the LGBT situation is in homelessness. It's a scary statistic that 24% of young homeless people identify as LGBT. That's a disproportionately high number. Like anybody who knows the statistics of, I can never say that word, can I? Anyone who knows the statistics of how much our community makes up of the wider community, that's far too high. And if you think about the wider perspective of homelessness, it's only getting worse. It's doubled since 2011. There's over 4,000 people in England sleeping rough every single night. And in 2016, 8,000 homeless people were reported in London. That's over the course of a year. That's doubled since, I think the last time they did those stats was 2010. It's a really, really bad situation. It's only getting worse with the changes to the benefit system, with changes in legislation that make it harder for people to get social housing. We hear about it all the time. It's in the papers all the time. People are in bad situations and finding it hard to get help from the local services. So suddenly, these local charities like Albert Kennedy Trust, the Outside Organization, they're all stepping in to do what they can. What we're going to do today is hear some stories of people who have been through that. They've experienced homelessness, and they've come through the other side. Some of them are still trying to work it out. So I'd like to welcome to the panel, Bridie. Bridie, come on. Carla. Matthew and Anira. Grab a seat, dear.
Oh my God. Is that me too? I'm just gonna sit down.
I'd like to think the majority of us grow up in supportive families. Like, even if our parents have a difficult journey to accepting our LGBT identity, it might take years or months, but eventually the majority of us, I'd like to think, come up to a point of acceptance from them. Often that takes a lot more understanding and patience from all of us than them. But what's more disconcerting, I think, is the fact that for a lot of people, you don't feel safe in your own home. When your parents can't accept your sexuality or your gender identity, when they can't accept the core of who you are, your home is not necessarily your safest place in the world. So your only recourse is to run away. It's something that I think all of you here have experienced. Matthew,
Okay, so
you work for Gallup, yeah?
I do.
And
yeah.
what do you do there?
Okay, so I work for Gallup. I'm one of the hate crime
Hello, what is
caseworkers,
that?
and Gallup is an organisation, an LGBT organisation that supports victims of hate crime, sexual violence, and domestic abuse.
So you must have a lot of stories that come through Gallup of people that have experienced some really dramatic or traumatizing situations.
Absolutely.
Is there one in particular that you can highlight and share with us now?
Yeah. Approximately 2 months ago, it was a week before the Outside Project opened, I had a young gentleman who had been beaten up by his neighbours in his home. He went to the police. Unfortunately, the police weren't very helpful. A week later, he had a bottle smashed over his head, and he ended up with a massive scar down his face. Because of what he experienced the week before, he didn't go to the police. So I was trying to kind of build up his confidence to engage with the police.
Did you meet him directly then?
He came to visit me.
Okay.
He came to see me at our offices at Gallup.
Yeah.
A week after that, he rang me up to say that his boyfriend had thrown him out, so he didn't have anywhere else to go. And then, so I tried to get him into a shelter. I did. I got him into a shelter. But when I explained what this shelter would be like, even though I explained it'd be a temporary situation, he got scared, and I didn't hear from him for 2 months. So he was out there.
This is just one of many stories that
Exactly.
obviously you deal with yourself.
Absolutely.
I'm just going to bring someone else on, Faz, who's just joined us. Come in. Sitting in the wings. Come and join us. Sit down.
Thank you.
Yourself, you've experienced a domestic violence situation.
Yeah.
And you felt you had to make yourself homeless in order to get away from it, like you had nowhere else to run.
I went to a homeless persons unit. My boyfriend at the time was an alcoholic, and I could no longer live there. And when I was at the homeless persons unit, the gentleman said to me, because I disclosed to him that I was HIV positive, he actually said to me, because you're HIV positive, you wouldn't be able to go in a hostel, would you? Because it would be dangerous for you to share a kitchen and a bathroom. Now, I know that sounds awful, but he was actually saying that because he wanted to help me. He could see I was very vulnerable, and he was worried about me going into a hostel. So he used that as an excuse to put me in a temporary one-bedroom flat. Sadly, there are less resources these days, so if that had happened today, I would have ended up in a hostel and potentially gone from one abusive situation into another.
Generally, like across the board, how easy is it to help people and to get them into safety or to give them a place to go to?
It's really difficult, and this is why I was so keen to volunteer for the Outside Project, because I have a lot of clients who are in abusive situations. I have a lot of phone calls come through in the helpline where people are trying to flee abuse, but they've either been in hostels before or they've heard about what hostels are like. So it's a choice of staying with people who claim to love them, who are abusing them, or going into a hostel where they're going to be abused by complete strangers. But since the Outside Project opened 3 weeks ago, I had someone call me on the helpline. They were fleeing an abusive situation, and within 3 hours, I got them into the hostel. So I knew I got them to a place of safety.
We should talk about the Outside Project now. I was going to bring it on later, but as you mentioned it, we should bring that in so people know what we're referring to. Carla Icola, you're a modern-day saint. Yeah, you've...
He's like a PR person. He's a great volunteer as well.
Were you an outreach worker, correct?
I was an outreach worker.
Yeah.
I worked in a day centre before that, and I worked in a hostel. I worked in a supported accommodation. So I've kind of worked in the sector in a few different areas.
But you experienced homelessness, I understand. You're like for 5 or 6 years.
Yeah.
You jumped between accommodations, staying with friends, going to services. What started that experience for you?
I think there's a lot of complex issues that led to my homelessness, and I think that, for some people there's one really kind of, damaging situation, but especially for women there's like different safety nets, and this will fail and this will fail. So I think over time it's just about being broken down by different experiences. It's like abusive partner, end up in staying with friends, sofa surfing, everybody gets a bit sick of you doing that. You end up maybe with some relatives that are homophobic. This is my experience.
We often assume it's to do with like parents, but sometimes it can be a domestic violence situation, like with partners or.
Well, yeah, really often. I mean, our community are more likely to experience domestic violence. So, and we're less likely to recognise it as well.
Because when you think of homelessness, you think of somebody there is a distinction. There's rough sleepers who are literally people on the street sleeping, but a homeless person can also technically, it is somebody without a home. Somebody staying with friends who doesn't have a place to go to that they can call their own, doesn't have a flat, doesn't have a bed. That's, homeless.
So
and there's a lot of hidden homeless, isn't there?
Our community make up the hidden homelessness, and women as well. So we'll sleep on buses, we'll sofa surf, we'll go to all-night parties, then the after party, and then the party after that. So that's the kind of behaviour that we have. We don't recognise our own homelessness a lot of the time. We've been out campaigning over the past year for the project, and a lot of people have come to me at the end of the night and said, I'm in this situation, and I didn't think that I was homeless. People have this kind of idea that you need to be in a doorway with a sleeping bag and there you're homeless. People I'm speaking to in the clubs and the bars, they live in those clubs and bars. That's where they live, and they go home at night with different people every night, and because they're homeless. And they live in squats and parks and places that outreach workers aren't going to find them, because obviously they're more at risk being actually visibly out on the street.
Your personal experience, you ended up working in outreach following years of being homeless. Like, you went through the system, I guess. You went to, what was the project that got you off the streets initially?
It wasn't really. I mean, again, it's not approachable. I didn't find it approachable. I went to Crisis Day Centre in Whitechapel. They put me on a course working with vulnerable people. I was a bit like, how did you get your job? That was a bit rude. So I kind of just worked my way out of it, really. But yeah, it's like breakdown in employment. I had homophobia in my job, so I had to leave my job. And so it's like loads of different experiences that I had that just made me give up, actually, on trying to sort things. And I ended up squatting, and it's just really dangerous.
I can imagine it just wears you down as well, and it impacts your mental health. There's issues of depression, anxiety creeps in, and you just get into a cycle of negative thinking, don't you?
And if you need to stay awake all night to be in the club and to go home and be that fun person, all of the drugs come into it. It's just like endless amounts of drugs on the scene that people will give you, because you're at the after party, and you take them because you need to stay awake and you need to be this fun person. If you can't just go to an after party and fall asleep in the corner, because then you're not going to get invited back again. So you end up kind of getting into this spiral situation of being this fun party person. So
last year you had this idea to start the crowdfunding project. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that? That's a phenomenal achievement, what you did. I'm so impressed.
Well, thank you. Well, I definitely didn't do it on my own.
Well, it came from your idea.
Yeah, I mean, if it weren't for the community, and as I say, it's like going out to places and so many people recognizing that this is their experience as well, and inviting us to fundraisers, people donating their birthday party to us, things like that. So we launched at London Pride, and we launched the crowdfunder, and within the space of 4 months we'd raised £11,500, which is phenomenal considering our community. We're broke, we're more likely to suffer with poverty as well as everything else. So the fact that we raised that was it amazes me.
What did that money allow you to do? You bought a bus?
We bought a bus, so we bought a 12-bed tour bus.
Tour bus, yeah.
And
had some good history to it, I imagine.
Huh?
Metallica's tour bus.
Yeah, it was Metallica's tour bus. And Status Quo and Radio. Yeah, some famous people have been on this bus.
And then every night you took that bus around different locations, or? No,
we had a secure location. We had referrals from Albert Kennedy Trust, Gallup, Stonewall Housing. So young people who were homeless, people fleeing violence or hate crime, they would come to us at the shelter, and we would support them to move into secure accommodation as much as we could.
And what were some of the people that came through your door like? What were some situations? You said obviously we've got to hide people's identities, so we can't be specific, but what were some of the more traumatic or disturbing situations you've encountered?
I think people in accommodation already, like winter shelters, but just experiencing homophobia, transphobia, biphobia in those situations. So like winter shelters and hostel, like mainstream services is what we kind of call them, and just not feeling safe there and having to flee that kind of situation. So we had a lot of that. We had people fleeing violence in the home. I'm just going to put it out there as well. It's like, yeah, violence in our community. If you're violent towards your partner, it doesn't make you a stud, and it doesn't make you more mask. And I think that that's like an issue that we have amongst our community. So yeah, domestic violence, hate crime in the street as well. So yeah,
I guess if you're LGBT as well, you're sometimes, if you've been through a negative situation or a situation where you're not accepted, it's harder for you to then seek help through the general services because you're concerned people will understand your story.
Yeah, I mean, if you walk through the door of any kind of day centre or HPU, you know, you're having to deal with the worst situation you've ever been in your life, and on top of that, you might get homophobia or transphobia or biphobia, or you'll be put into a situation where full of people that you're trying to avoid. Like when I went into Crisis Day Centre, it was full of guys, and these are the people that I was avoiding in the squats and the parks and places that I was kind of hanging around and sleeping. When I was sleeping on the buses, I was avoiding these kind of older guys that looked a bit scary. So it's like, then I walked into a room full of them. So that was just terrifying. I mean, and it's worse as well for our trans community to try and navigate their way through that space. I mean, at least for me, I could try and go into stealth mode. I could try and kind of pretend that I was straight. Just look at me, you know. So people do that as well. But then there's a negative effect from that because people's mental health deteriorates when they're not living their true self in their real identities. So,
it's hard enough to live your true self sometimes with a job, you know, at school, when you have a roof over your head, let alone when you don't have that stability around you. I mean, Anira, we'll move on to you. You're originally from Denmark?
Yeah.
Okay. You moved over here in 2015, is that right? And you had a job to go to, you were working?
So I was already set up with a job when I came to London. I moved to Kingston, and 5 months later, I was basically homeless.
Right, so you lost your job,
Yeah.
and obviously you can't pay your rent, so then everything, it's very easy for everything to like fall apart quite quickly, especially in London if you can't afford your rent, which is very expensive.
Exactly.
Suddenly you're faced with nowhere to go. You found yourself actually sleeping rough as well, which, you know, on the streets and fire exits.
Yeah, like I always try to like keep myself safe. So I found like hostels and like hotels and like fire exit like doors. Basically just anything else than in the street, because, you know, you just need to keep yourself safe.
It's quite, obviously, sometimes, you know, you stand out more on the streets, I guess, if you're trans as well, and it's a more threatening situation. You said there was some negative times where, you know, some difficult moments where somebody was filming you as well.
People are just so out of line these days.
So you're homeless, you're sleeping rough on the street, and you had somebody filming you as well.
No, I've never really like slept on the street.
Right.
Like, it's have just been like day-to-day basis when I've been like, you know, on the train or like, you know, out and about basically. And people just take their cameras and just like low-key trying to like take a pic or like film me, obviously because that I'm different or trans or whatever. But yeah, no, yeah, that can be a bit too much, especially if you're like going through the homelessness, and on top of that, it's just, that's like the last thing you need.
You've had people be verbally abusive to you as well.
Yeah, and you know, I've just started to just like stick up for myself and challenging it, because in the beginning I was more likely to just ignore it and just like walk away, but it's just, if you keep walking away, they're just gonna keep thinking it's okay. And if you stand up, you're not only standing up for yourself, you also stand up, you know, for the rest of the community.
But you're also putting yourself in a threatening situation, because I guess people, you don't know, they could be drunk, they could be aggressive. You said you've had to run away from situations before like that?
Say again?
Have you had to run away for like escape situations like that?
Yeah,
from
no.
people?
Obviously, because when you're homeless, you just spend so much, like an amount of time just being out and about, and then you know it's more likely for like stuff to happen because you just have so many hours you need to like go through. Yeah, I've had like a day when I was just like walking, and this guy starts me up, and he's like, "What are you, a man or a woman?" And I was just like, "What is the need for you to come and approach me like that?" And you know, stuck up for myself. And then he walked towards me, and I just bought this Fanta from Burger King, and I was so ready to get that down, but instead I took my Fanta and I threw it at him, and I just started running because he started like running after me, and I run into this bar, and they were just so amazingly like, the manager came out and you know made sure he like kicked him out and made sure like that I was safe until like he was out of sight. But yeah, you know, it's just you know, just like I used to go to libraries a lot, you know, to waste time, and it's just school kids as well, like I don't know, 13, 14, you know, when they like in cliques and you know they see you walking, and then one of them starts with a comment, and then they all start to laugh, and yeah, I find that.
I guess it says something about society, doesn't it? The way we dehumanize homeless people. I think, you know, it's easier for a lot of us in society to just not think of them as human beings, just because then we don't have to feel guilty, I guess. Like we can move on from that thought quite easier when we dehumanize people like that.
I think people just blame homeless people. Oh, they must be drug addicts. It's like, well, where did their drug addiction come from?
Yeah.
Like, nobody decides to be a drug addict. They're obviously masking something. Something's happened earlier on in their life, or they're just lazy. They don't want to work. How are you supposed to work when you don't have somewhere to sleep at night?
Yeah.
So I think that people make excuses for why they can walk past people in doorways and why they've kicked their partners out, or you know, their kids out onto the street. You know, it's all their fault. So,
you spoke earlier about people, especially within the gay community, jumping from party to party. That's something you went through as well.
Oh my God, yeah. I literally used to just go out, just to like, you know, I always like went to a random bar or whatever and like acted like I was waiting for my friends. And then, you know, I'm very sociable, so I always ended up like finding a group of people. And then you just like stuck along, and then like came an excuse like, oh my God, my friends are not coming. And then just like, you can just hang with us. So yeah, like I've been, especially like Vauxhall, because you know, like all these clubs always like closed so late, at like 8 o'clock in the morning. So yeah, it was so jarring, like
so
every
day.
day.
Just go back to their house, you'd kind of like get comfortable, have
Basically,
a shower or have a sleep or something.
But you couldn't even sleep because you know it was an after party, and then, you know, like, so when you come to that after party, you kind of have to like force yourself to be awake, and all you want to do is just lay down and rest. But you know,
I guess you're keeping up a pretense, aren't you?
Also, like, then there's drugs and all that stuff, and yeah, just to keep yourself awake and have that extra energy kick. Yeah.
You managed to, you got in touch with your project, Outside Organisation, and you're being helped currently?
Basically, I Googled like youth homelessness, and I found Albert Kennedy Trust. Such an amazing organization, just helped me so much. And they're the one that got me introduced to my Gordon Angel. And yeah, and she's been taking care of me. And, you know, the Outside Project.
Yeah.
Been there since December.
I understand you're getting help now to get yourself, because you don't have a relationship with your parents, do you?
No, I
That
don't.
broke down a while ago. Is that
Yeah.
right? Yeah, your parents are from Morocco?
So yeah, my origins are Moroccan. You know, it was I just had to get away from Denmark, and I kind of pushed my parents away, and I just kind of cut contacts with them.
And you've not had contact with them since you left?
No, I haven't. Basically,
How do you feel about that?
Well, you know, I don't really think about it because you know so much is happening.
You don't have time to think about it,
no,
do you?
exactly.
You've got to look after yourself.
I haven't really like sit down and actually like process like, wow, I actually don't speak with them. But also because like I'm still kind of angry, you know, because when I think about my parents, I just think about all these, you know, times where I just had to like before I come home, like chains, like outfits, and all these like arguments, and all the like the cultural like Moroccan people, when they've seen me, they call my parents and be like, we've seen your kid out and about dressed like this, and where I'm from, it's a small city, so like I was very like recognizable, mainly because I was twerking a lot in the clubs.
Yeah.
Always so extra.
But the clubs is a safe space for a lot of LGBT plus people to go to, isn't it? Because you go there, majority of people in there either have hidden themselves or are a bit on the outside. So we kind of go there, we dance, and we can kind of forget everything for like a few hours.
That's another thing I feel like with me, like I wouldn't say that I was an alcoholic, but I mainly just drank just to like get away from like the reality, and then you're like tipsy and you're wavy, and everything is just so much more like easier.
Of course.
Actually.
I'm going to move over to Bridie. Hello. You're from Newcastle. You live up Newcastle now, yeah?
Yeah, I live in Newcastle.
Okay, and you're currently studying. You're at university.
I'm at Teesside University. I study psychology and counselling.
But your education was slightly put off track as well, wasn't it? Because you were living between your grandmother's house, your mother's house, and your father's house, like moving between each on a regular basis.
Yeah, it was complicated. Like obviously, there was arguments and other like complications in the family home, which meant that I had to move a lot. Like my mum suffers from spina bifida, hydrocephalus, and other conditions that make she's in and out of hospital quite a lot, and that put a lot of stress on me and my stepdad, because obviously made like looking after my little brother quite difficult. And obviously with other stresses going around, like obviously when you were a teenager, there's a lot of stress in like your own life anyway.
Yeah. And
there was other contributing factors, and I think
that's a lot of disruption for somebody that's like 16, 17 trying to study, isn't it?
It made life pretty hard.
Yeah.
And I don't think it helped that when I came out as like a lesbian, I did it through Facebook. I decided not to use, like actually confront my parents and deal with the issue. It's not an issue, but like to them it may have been.
I understand that the majority of tensions were between your stepdad and yourself, and you were often, because of the arguments that would happen at home with your mother, your stepdad, and yourself, they were blaming you for damaging your mother's and stepdad's relationship.
Yeah, I mean,
that's a lot for a teenager to take, isn't it?
The reason I sought help with AKT was because there was this specific argument, and I wasn't even involved. I was in my room, like I shut myself in the room because I preferred to be away from them, because I felt like if I was out of the way of their arguments, I wasn't the one causing them. And I heard my stepdad scream at my mum that if I didn't leave the house, if I didn't leave, he was going to leave my little brother and her. And I didn't want to be responsible for like their marriage dissolving.
Yeah.
So, and my mum literally called my dad to ask him to come get us, because apparently I was so disruptive I couldn't even stay in my own bedroom. I had to leave. Like I literally got dragged out my room and like forced to my dad's house while everyone's kicking off us, saying that I'm destroying my parents' lives. And it was a stressful time, definitely.
So you ended up actually not staying with either of them, telling them you were at one of their places, but actually you were just staying with friends, weren't you, or just sleep on sofas?
Yeah, I'd try and find whoever's house was like most convenient, or whoever had something there that I could go to be away from them. And I'd spend like weeks on end at my friend's house, or like saying I was at one friend's house and at another, just to try and, so they thought I was safe, but realistically I probably wasn't. And it's obviously not a good way to live. Like, it's not, lying to people is not like good, especially not when it's your parents. Nobody should feel like they have to lie to their parents.
And obviously it directly impacted your education, didn't it?
Oh, it really disrupted my education. I've sat 3 different sets of A-levels before I found one that I could actually, I managed to pass, and I didn't.
Yeah.
I don't think if it wasn't for AKT, I wouldn't be where I am now.
And the levels of anxiety that come with that, and depression, I guess, it affects your mental health and your confidence.
Yeah, I suffer from anxiety and other mental health conditions, and just the stress and everything that was going on was really bringing us down. And like I've obviously been like made us feel really suicidal, made us feel really depressed. It just wasn't a comfortable situation.
So how did you find yourself getting out of that cycle of crashing at friends and like not having your own home? Where did you go for help?
Well, mainly I got in contact with AKT.
The Albert Kennedy Trust.
Yeah, the Albert Kennedy Trust. and they helped me find a flat with them, which gave us the space I needed to like rebuild my family relationships, and like also gave me the space away from them so they could work on their problems without me sort of being a hindrance or whatever the situation, you know.
When was that when you went to them? How long ago was that?
Sorry?
How long ago was that when you went to AKT?
I was housed with AKT in July of 2016.
Okay.
Since then I've completed my A-level course, and I've now, in September, I enrolled to Teesside Uni to do psychology and counselling.
That's fantastic. But so you're not living with any of your family now, you're living on your own?
I live in an AKT, Albert Kennedy Trust property.
Okay. How do you feel about what you've been through over the last 3 years? It's more than most people your age will have experienced in their lives so far.
I'm quite grateful. I'm quite grateful for the experience, because there was things about my life, things the way I was acting that obviously weren't right as well. Like, it wasn't all my parents' fault. Some of it was on me, and taking myself away from the situation gave us the chance to reflect, realise where I was going wrong, and realise how I could help to rebuild those bonds that had been broken down. And obviously, I think it gave my parents the same opportunity, and it's given myself the opportunity to build myself up as a better person.
Well, it sounds like you're a remarkably strong person, so...
Thank you.
Faz, you had a similar story in that you had a disruptive family situation. You realised that at quite a young age that you were born into a female body, but you were not female, you were male. So, and then that was about 5 or 6 years old, you said?
Yeah, I was 5 years old when I cut my hair off when I was like 5 years old, because my mum put like plaits into my hair, and obviously I didn't like plaits.
Yeah.
So I looked at myself in the mirror and I thought to myself, like, this is not me. I am not this person. So I just got a scissors and I just cut off my hair, to be honest. And then, like, my mum was devastated, as any parent would be. But luckily, at the end of it, I got a bold haircut done, and because I was 5 years old, you couldn't really like distinguish whether I was female or male. It was a lot easier. But she always made sure that she made me wear like flowery shoes, so that people could distinguish that I am female. So.
And then I think at the age, you lost your father quite young, at age of 6, I think?
Yeah.
Right.
So I was 6 years old when I lost my father.
And then your mother was aware of your gender dysmorphia, wasn't it? She went to the doctor to seek advice.
Yeah.
And what happened there?
So she went to the doctor because, like, I come from a Pakistani-Iranian family, and we tend to rely heavily on the doctor's verdict about anything. So she went to the doctors and said, like, I know that's not a male and I know that's not a female. So tell me what's going on with my child. And at that time, like, this is back in the 90s, early 2000s, the doctor said it's a phase that I'm going through. So my mum hung on to that, like, for a very, very long time. It's a phase, you get over it, it's a phase, you get over it. And then she tried to push me into wear like more traditional clothing. I'd become a little bit more feminine, but clearly that wasn't me, and I felt like I was to blame for that, because I felt like I wasn't meeting expectations into the gender identity that she wanted me to be.
So, when she said to you it's a phase, how did that make you feel?
Pardon?
When you were told that it's a phase, you're going to grow out of it, how did that make you feel?
I felt disheartened, to be honest with you. Like, I was very, very young, but to be told that that's a phase is...
Because you just want your parents to say, yes, I love you, and you're great as you are.
But it's invalidating your feelings. And I felt like when you're young, it's easier for parents to be like, oh no, it's just a phase, or it's easier for them to be dismissive. But that wasn't the case with me. And I think later on that caused me a lot of mental health, like anxiety, and a lot of like I didn't have self-confidence the way I do now.
And then your mother, she ended up battling cancer for a few years, didn't she? And passed away when you were 15?
16, yeah.
16. Then you went into the care of your auntie. You lived at home, in the family home, with your two brothers?
Yeah.
Okay. Your auntie wasn't so accepting. Well, your mother wasn't necessarily accepting, but she didn't try to force you into like engaging in your, traditions or the religious background that you grew up with. But your auntie was not like that.
No, she wasn't. She was very much cultured and very much religious. And in Islam, according to her, like it wasn't acceptable to be trans. So that led to like her and I having a lot of arguments, a lot of fights, and her constantly saying to me that you're female, realize you're female. And obviously as a trans person, that wasn't comfortable to go through because that's not who I am. And every time they used the wrong pronouns and called me she, that invalidated my feelings.
Did she try to make you wear traditional dress as well?
Yep, it was her daughter's wedding actually, and she wanted me to attend her daughter's wedding, and we were like siblings with her children. But she wanted me to wear a dress, and I just couldn't do that because that would have meant that everybody would identify me as female, and I'm not female. So we had like a massive argument around that.
So you started to feel, obviously, your home life was undermined, you know, your comfort at home felt threatened. That led you down to a route of anxiety, and obviously where you're questioning yourself. You said there were some points where you felt you couldn't leave the house.
I had a lot of gender dysphoria, and I was staring myself in the mirror, and I just couldn't walk out my room, let alone walk out the house, because even in the house I would wear my binder like all day long. Even at night times I would sleep with my binder, and I know that's not good. But at that point, I just wanted some recognition of my identity, and I felt like if I performed male, and if I was being male and like exaggerating my masculinity whilst I was at home, maybe my family will consider me to be male. But clearly, that wasn't the case.
So it was terrible in the fact that you didn't feel safe at home, but at the same time, you didn't feel like you could leave the house. Yeah. So you're completely trapped in some respects.
Yeah, I mean, I would often find myself like just crying like in my room and like just curled up underneath the blanket because I felt like this is my only safe spot and this is all I have. But it wasn't until I went to AKT and I went to Albert Kennedy Trust that I found out like I could have a home where I could be accepted. And I was put into the Purple Door Project where I met other people that were like me. And it wasn't a house, it wasn't a project. Like to me, it was our home.
So you ended up getting evicted from your family home because obviously you struggled to pay bills. Ended up having to be made homeless, and then you were crashing at a friend's house for a while.
Yeah. So for 6 months after I decided to leave my aunt's house, I was homeless for 6 months, and I stayed around my friend's house.
And then during that time as well, you were trying to study as well.
During that time, I was trying to I just graduated, so I was just trying to find my way into the working world. But that was impossible being trans because A, you have to explain to them you're trans. B, you got to make sure the workplace is supportive of trans people. And going to interviews was the hardest thing because you have to have that conversation with them about identity. And more times people don't know the difference between sex and gender. And you're too busy in an interview trying to fight the sex and gender is two different things. So that never ever worked out.
I mean, one of the disturbing, when we spoke earlier, you were telling me your story. One of the things that really struck home with me was when you said I didn't know what safety meant at home. Yeah. Not to know what it feels like to be safe at home, and to live with that every day. I mean, you've been through that as well. It's quite a terrifying thing. It's something a lot of us take for granted, isn't it?
I mean, the concept of home is safety, and like you said, not to feel safe at home, a place where you're supposed to be yourself, and not having that comfort, and not being able to live as yourself, and to feel constantly thinking I felt more comfortable outside when I did gain the courage to go outside, and I did stay out a lot around my friend's house because I didn't feel comfortable at home.
Matthew, obviously at Gallup.
Yeah.
You have a lot of these stories coming through.
Yeah.
Do you feel things have got better over the last 5-10 years, or do you think things are no different, or are they worse?
I think they've got a lot worse. I mean, when I moved to London 20 years ago, you could afford, accommodation was affordable.
So they've got worse not necessarily because of society getting worse, but because the nature of trying to live in modern England or modern UK.
I think it's got worse because the support. I mean, yes, people. there is much more integration in terms of the LGBT community. People can be open, but there is little support for people who aren't able to, that haven't got that family support networks behind them. There is very little social support. The charities are really struggling. All charity workers are doing the work of 2 or 3 people these days. And there is just, 10 or 20 years ago, you could present at a homeless persons unit, and if you were classed as vulnerable, if you were referring someone to a homeless persons unit, you knew that person, that the social services, or there would be organisations that would offer them safe accommodation. But now, that's not the case.
I think it's funny because we see all these advancements in legal rights. Like, you can get married, you can't get discriminated against at work. There's so many laws that have been passed, and we're told things are so much better. But the problem is, a lot of young people, they're still growing up in families who for generations have been anti-LGBT+. So yes, you might have all these legal rights and protections, but at the end of the day, they mean nothing if the home that you're growing up in, or the schools that you're surrounded by, your peers, are, homophobic or transphobic. It's, it doesn't mean anything really if your immediate environment is not supportive.
Absolutely, and also, there is this, if you're not from an abusive background, if you're not in a situation where you're vulnerable, if you're not in a situation where you're having to worry about how you're going to pay rent, or how you're going to get the next job, or where you're going to find somewhere safe to stay, you can almost think, well, why do we need LGBT charities? Why do we need to fight for LGBT rights? Because it's all okay now. We've got same-sex marriage. Everything's good. But for people who haven't got that network, and for people who are discriminated against by their own family, and they haven't got the financial means to get by on a day-to-day basis, it can be a very bleak and depressing situation.
Okay, I think we need to wrap up shortly. Our crowd is much, it's grown and huge now. I think one of the amazing things we could all do today is actually tweet and Facebook and send messages to your local MPs. There's the Home and Communities MP, Sajid Javid. Heather Wheeler is responsible for homelessness. Tweet at Student Pride, at Attitude Mag as well. That's where I'm from. I'm the editor of Attitude Magazine. We are doing a report next month, the next issue, about youth homelessness. I've published 2 articles this week about the subject. I've been out on the streets meeting rough sleepers, with outreach teams, meeting people who use public transport as a shelter, jumping on night buses because it's cold at night, so you don't want to sleep on the street. You're sleeping on the bus or the tube. The tube is 24 hours now, so you can effectively have shelter all weekend. These people are in desperate situations. A lot of people, you don't choose to become homeless. You don't choose to sleep rough on the streets. What we need to do is make the government realise there is a huge problem, and do what we can to support people like the Albert Kennedy Trust, Outside Organisation, and Gallup, who are doing all their best to help LGBT+ people who are desperate and in need of help. So please don't forget the power of social media. Put it to good use. Don't just take selfies. And tell people we need awareness and help. And I think we're done. I'd like to thank everybody here for sharing the stories. You're all amazing. You've all been through so much. And we're done.